My friends, if there's one thing money can't buy, it's peace of mind. And Arthur Pendleton discovered that the hard way. Arthur, you see, wasn't a bad guy. He was the kind of man who built his own empire, but, like every empire, his was built on a lot of ambition, and let's be frank, a bit of elbowing the neighbors. The Pendleton farm there in Harmony Creek, in the heart of Oklahoma, was something out of a movie. Thousands of acres stretching as far as the eye could see. When the sun rose, it seemed to be gilding the cornfield just for Arthur. He had started small like his father, but Arthur had a vision that his father didn't. He wanted to be the biggest, and he succeeded. By his 40s, he was already the richest farmer in the county, maybe even the state. He had tractors that looked like spaceships, giant silos that dominated the landscape, and his money wasn't just in land, it was in stocks, partnerships, everything that made a profit. The problem is that Arthur's success was like a tree that grows too fast. The roots end up suffocating everything around it. His expansion was aggressive, folks. He didn't ask, he bought. If a neighbor was struggling, Arthur would arrive with an offer that was impossible to refuse, but which deep down was an eviction order. I remember the Millers' story well. They were elderly. They'd owned their land for 3 generations. Arthur wanted that piece of land to connect 2 parts of his farm. He surrounded the Millers, increased the price of the surrounding land, put pressure on the cooperative. In 6 months, the Millers sold and left for the city, heartbroken and with full pockets, but with wounded dignity. Arthur, of course, saw nothing wrong with it. For him, it was just business. "If it's not me, it'll be someone else," he'd say, shrugging and adjusting his cowboy hat. Over the past 5 years, he had doubled the size of Pendleton Ranch. He had bought the Millers' land, the Johnsons' land, and even that swamp that nobody wanted because he knew it could be drained and turned into prime pasture. He was at his peak, planning to buy another 200 head of cattle and close a gigantic soybean export contract to Asia. But then the tide began to turn, and it wasn't just a small tidal wave, it was a tsunami that arrived without warning. The first sign that things were going badly came in the middle of the harvest. Arthur had closed that export contract, the biggest of his life. The buyer was a huge company from Hong Kong, and the payment would be astronomical. The warehouse was already overflowing with sacks, everything ready for shipment, when the phone rang. It was his lawyer, Mr. Harrison, with a voice more tense than barbed wire. "Arthur, please sit down," said Harrison. Arthur was standing there, checking the grain moisture meter, and replied impatiently, "Speak quickly, Harrison, I'm busy." The Hong Kong contract was terminated. There was a problem with the documentation, something about the certificate of origin that they claim was not fulfilled. They cancelled the entire purchase and are demanding the return of the advance payment. Arthur almost dropped the meter. That contract represented 1/3 of the harvest. "But how, Harrison? The documentation was perfect. I paid for the most expensive certification in the state." "I know, Arthur, but they're adamant. They said the soybeans don't meet the standards, and worse, they're suing to get back the advance payment with a penalty." What you've heard so far is just the beginning of what truly unfolded in Arthur Pendleton's life. There are still revelations that will move you, especially when the healer's intervention transforms a destiny that seemed sealed. But before we continue, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the strength to continue bringing you profound, mysterious, and exciting stories like this one. That day, Arthur lost more money than many farmers in Harmony Creek earned in 10 years. He tried calling, tried negotiating, but the Hong Kong company simply vanished. It was as if the deal had never existed, leaving behind a black hole in the finances of Pendleton Farm. Arthur was furious, of course. He called all his contacts, spent a fortune on lawyers, but nothing. The contract was broken, and he had to sell all that soy in a hurry for a pittance to a local buyer who knew about the situation and took advantage shamelessly. Bad luck, he thought. It's the market. Sometimes it happens. But the bad luck didn't stop there. It seemed to have taken root at Pendleton Farm. 2 weeks later, he had finalized the purchase of that elite cattle, 250 head of the finest bloodline. The animals arrived, they were healthy, and he invested a fortune to house them. 3 days later, for no apparent reason, the cattle began to die. It wasn't a common disease. Veterinarians came from far away, performed tests, and collected samples. It seemed like the animals were being poisoned. But there was no toxin, no known bacteria. They simply collapsed and died, one after the other. In 1 week, Arthur lost more than half of his new herd. The loss was immeasurable, not only because of the value of the animals, but also because of the investment in the genetic lineage. Arthur began to lose sleep. He paced the farm like a ghost, his eyes bloodshot, his hat crooked. He was the man who solved everything, who controlled everything. But now control was slipping through his fingers like fine sand. He tried to blame the employees, the veterinarian, the cattle salesman. He yelled, he threatened, but deep down he knew it wasn't their fault. There was something strange, a heavy cloud hanging over Pendleton Farm. "It's just a bad phase, Arthur." His wife Martha, a practical and reserved woman, tried to console him. "We'll tighten our belts, sell some old equipment, and we'll get through this." But Arthur knew it wasn't just a phase. The problems multiplied at an alarming rate. One day, one of the newest tractors, the one that looked like a spaceship, caught fire out of nowhere. The driver was far away, thank God, but the machine was totaled. The next day, the irrigation system he had just installed, which had cost a fortune, began to fail in a cascade of malfunctions. Pipes burst, pumps stopped working, and the worst part, the contracts. Arthur had a name in the market, a solid name. But suddenly, suppliers stopped calling. Banks that had previously begged to lend money were now calling, demanding interest and additional guarantees. A land sale he had been negotiating for months for a real estate development was cancelled because the buyer claimed that the risk was too high. "High risk? I'm Arthur Pendleton. I'm the lowest risk in Harmony Creek," he yelled, alone in his luxurious office. He began to tally up the losses. In 6 months, he had lost more than 40% of his working capital. The accounts were in the red. The empire he had spent 20 years building was crumbling into pieces, and he couldn't identify the enemy. It was invisible. He tried logic, science, accounting. He hired expensive consultants from out of state. They reviewed the books, the logistics, the weather. The end result was always the same. Technically, Arthur shouldn't be losing money. The farm's fundamentals were solid. What was happening defied economics and reason. One night he was sitting on the porch, gazing at the dark expanse of land that he no longer felt belonged to him. It seemed as if the land was rejecting him. Martha, noticing his despair, sat down beside him. "Arthur, you're pale. You're not sleeping. You need help, but it's not accountant help you need." He looked at her, too tired to argue. "What do you suggest, Martha?" "An exorcist." He tried to laugh, but the sound came out hoarse and hollow. Martha didn't laugh. She looked towards the horizon where the full moon was beginning to appear. "I was talking to Mrs. Perkins, the pastor's wife. She said you should go see Ilara." Arthur frowned. "Ilara? Who's Ilara? Some new risk consultant?" "No, Arthur. Ilara is the healer. She lives over near Cold Springs in those mountains." Arthur, the most rational and pragmatic man in Harmony Creek, nearly choked. "Are you serious? You want me, Arthur Pendleton, to go consult a witch?" "She's not a witch. She's a healer, and people say she sees things we don't see. You've exhausted all logical options, Arthur. What do you have to lose? Your money is going away anyway." The truth of those words hit Arthur like a physical blow. He was too proud to admit it, but he was terrified. He was sinking, and there was no rope to hold him up. The next day, without telling anyone but Martha, Arthur Pendleton, the agribusiness millionaire, dressed in simple clothes, took the most unassuming pickup truck in his fleet and drove north toward the hills of Cold Springs. The place where Ilara lived was isolated, a dark wooden cabin surrounded by a chaotic garden of herbs and plants he had never seen before. There was no fence, no gate. It seemed as if time had stopped there. He got out of the truck, feeling ridiculous. The smell of wet earth and thick vegetation hung in the air. The cabin door opened before he could even knock. There was Ilara. She wasn't old, perhaps in her 50s, with long grey hair tied in a braid. She had deep green eyes that seemed to see through his skin, straight into his soul. She wore simple linen clothes and had an air of calm that Arthur hadn't felt in months. "Arthur Pendleton," she said, her voice soft but full of authority. "I've been expecting you." He was speechless. He hadn't called. He hadn't made an appointment. How did you know my name? He asked, stumbling over his words. This land speaks, Arthur, and lately it has been calling your name. Come in. Your problem isn't one of plague or bank interest. It's a problem of the soul. Arthur entered the cabin. The interior was simple, filled with glass jars, dried roots hanging from the ceiling, and a strong smell of sage incense. He sat in the chair she indicated, feeling small and vulnerable. I've lost a lot of money, Alara, he began, trying to keep his voice steady and professional. Broken contracts, cattle dying, inexplicable mechanical failures. I need to know what's going on. I need a logical solution. Alara smiled, a sad smile. She picked up an earthenware bowl, filled it with fresh water, and placed it on the table in front of him. She closed her eyes and began to murmur words in a language he didn't recognize. Arthur felt a chill down his spine, a primal fear he had never felt dealing with millions of dollars. After a long silence, Alara opened her eyes and stared intently at the water in the bowl. Do you think it's bad luck, Arthur? Do you think it's the economy? No. She lifted her head and stared at him. Her green eyes were cold and hard. This is not bad luck, Arthur. This is the work of someone. Someone cast a shadow over your harvest, your livestock, and your name. Arthur shook his head skeptically, but her voice was so convincing that he couldn't ignore it. Who would do that? I have plenty of competitors. Competitors want your land. That's different. That's personal. That's deep envy, Arthur. An envy that has rotted and turned to poison. She paused dramatically, and the poison came from close by, very close. The one responsible for all this misfortune is blood of your blood. It's a family member who can't stand to see your success. The revelation hit Arthur like a lightning bolt. A relative. He thought of distant cousins, uncles he barely saw, but who would have the capacity or the malice to do something like that? Who is it? Arthur hissed, anger replacing fear. Tell me the name. Alara didn't say the name. She just sighed, picked up a handful of dried herbs, and threw them into the bowl of water. The liquid immediately became cloudy. The name doesn't matter now, Arthur. What matters is what was done. That person not only wished you harm, they paid for it. They planted the seed of ruin in your life. With every contract you lose, with every animal that dies, their envy feeds and grows stronger. Arthur was trembling. He had dismissed the idea of magic, of witchcraft, as nonsense for ignorant people. But there, in the presence of that woman, and burdened by the weight of his recent losses, he could no longer doubt. What do I do, Alara? How do I stop this? He pleaded. Alara leaned across the table. To stop this, it's not enough to break the spell. You have to break the source, and the source is the envy of this man, your relative. She picked up an object wrapped in a dark cloth. It appeared to be a piece of old wood, perhaps a twisted root. I can help you, Arthur. I can reverse this, but what I'm going to do to break this curse isn't easy. It's not tea, nor an amulet. It's something that will expose his evil and protect you forever. But you need to be willing to accept the consequences, because this will shock everyone in Harmony Creek. I'll accept anything, he said without thinking. I can't lose the farm. I can't lose everything. Alara stared intently at him, assessing the sincerity of his despair. Very well. What has been done will be undone, but what was taken from you will be returned with interest, and his envy will return to him threefold. The spell is tied to your success, Arthur. The only way to break the magic is to make your success explode again, and when that happens, his envy won't be able to bear it. It will self-destruct. Arthur swallowed hard. He didn't understand her words, but he sensed the power behind them. What you need to do, Alara continued, her voice low and deep, is go home, act as if nothing happened. Don't show fear. Don't look for your family member. I'll work on the outside, and you'll receive a sign that will prove the curse has been broken. She reached out and gave him the piece of twisted wood. Keep this. It's for your protection. Now go and prepare yourself. The recovery will be too quick to be natural, and that will be proof that the magic has been undone. But your relative's reaction when he realizes that his poison has failed and that you are thriving more than ever. Ah, Arthur, that will be the real shock. Arthur left Ilara's cabin in a state of confusion and dread. He was still Arthur Pendleton, the pragmatic farmer, but now he carried a mysterious piece of wood and the certainty that his own blood wanted his ruin. He returned to Harmony Creek. The farm still seemed like a financial battleground. He followed Ilara's advice. He acted normally, even though fear was gnawing at him from the inside. He waited for the signal. A week passed. Nothing. Arthur began to think he had wasted his money and that Martha was right. He was going crazy. On the morning of the 8th day, the phone rang. It was Mr. Harrison, the lawyer. "Arthur, you won't believe it!" Harrison's voice was excited, almost hysterical. "What's wrong, Harrison? Another cancelled contract?" Arthur asked, already expecting the worst. "No, remember that Hong Kong contract? The one they cancelled and demanded a penalty for? Well, the Hong Kong company just called. They said there was a serious administrative error and that the soybeans were in fact up to standard. Not only did they reverse the cancellation, but they're paying the full amount of the original contract, plus all the interest and penalties they charged you. And Arthur, they doubled the order for the next harvest. It's double, Arthur." Arthur felt the blood rush back to his face. Months of damage reversed in a single phone call. "And you have more," Harrison continued, breathless. The bank called. They approved not only the refinancing, but also the line of credit for the purchase of the Hendersons' land. They said the Pendleton Farm's finances seem miraculously sound again. Arthur hung up the phone. He looked at the twisted piece of wood that lay on his desk. The signal, the magic had been broken. But if the recovery was the sign, the prosperity that followed was proof that Ilara wasn't kidding. In the following months, Pendleton Ranch experienced a stroke of luck. Sales exceeded expectations. The weather was perfect. A new breed of cattle he had bought, with money he didn't even know he had, proved incredibly fertile and hardy. Arthur was back, richer and more powerful than ever. And with each new success, he felt the weight of Ilara's prophecy. His relatives' envy was being fueled. He tried to find out who it was, but he couldn't. Life went on, and Arthur was on top of the world again. But he knew that the most dangerous part of the story was yet to come. The shock. Ilara had promised that the curse would be broken, and that what she would do would leave everyone in shock. The rapid financial recovery had already shocked the community, but what happened next, involving the envious relative, was what truly brought Harmony Creek to its knees. It was the day of the county's big annual festival. Arthur Beaming was being honored as Farmer of the Year, a title he had lost during his period of financial hardship. He was on stage, next to Martha, ready to give his speech. And it was there, in the middle of the celebration, that Ilara made her final move. And Arthur and the entire audience saw the result of the magic being undone. As Arthur smiled at the crowd, he saw Ilara. She stood at the edge of the crowd, quiet, watching. Her green eyes met his, and she made a subtle movement with her head as if to say, "It's time." At that very moment, a man who was in the front row of the audience, a man who was an acquaintance of Arthur's, began to feel unwell. It wasn't an ordinary feeling of illness. He clutched his chest, his eyes wide, and began to scream. His cry was not one of pain, but of despair and fury. And what he shouted, pointing his trembling finger at Arthur, revealed to everyone the hidden truth behind the farmer's newfound prosperity. And the name that came out of that man's mouth, the envious relatives, was the name Arthur had tried to ignore all this time. The story continues. My friends, prepare yourselves, because what happened on that stage, in front of hundreds of people from Harmony Creek, was not just a scandal. It was an earthquake that shook everyone's faith, making people question what is real and what is invisible. Arthur Pendleton stood there, his chest puffed out with pride and, at the same time, with a chilling fear stemming from Ilara's prophecy. He saw her nod, and in that same instant the man in the front row began to writhe. That man was Walter Pendleton. Walter wasn't Arthur's direct brother, but he was his first cousin, the son of Arthur's father's younger brother. He was also a farmer, but a backyard farmer. While Arthur expanded his holdings to thousands of acres, Walter could barely keep up with the bills on his small plot of land, squeezed between his wealthy cousin's vast estates. He was always quiet and reserved, and Arthur barely noticed him, except at Thanksgiving lunches where Walter always seemed a little paler and a little quieter with each passing year. At that moment, however, Walter's silence exploded into a guttural sound. He stood up, knocking over the plastic chair. People around him tried to hold him, thinking it was a heart attack, but it wasn't physical pain that was consuming him. "Arthur! Arthur, you lucky devil!" he yelled, his raspy voice echoing through the sound system that was set up for Arthur's speech. The crowd, which had been applauding seconds before, fell into a deathly silence. Everyone stared at the stage and at Walter, who seemed to be on fire inside. Arthur up there felt the ground disappear. He recognized his cousin's gaze. It wasn't a look of pain, it was a look of pure hatred, mixed with an agony that seemed to come from his soul. "I hate you," Walter shouted, waving his arms wildly. "It should have been me. I deserve the success, not you, Arthur, who only knows how to step on others." The local sheriff, Bill, rushed to try and restrain Walter, but Arthur's cousin had a desperate strength. He broke free and pointed his finger, not only at Arthur but at the Farmer of the Year trophy that was on the table. "Bad luck was my gift to you," Walter confessed, saliva flying, not caring that the whole town was listening. I paid for your cattle to die, for your contracts to turn to dust. I wanted to see you crawl, Arthur. I wanted to see this land reject you." The shock was so great that no one moved. Martha let out a muffled cry and grabbed Arthur's arm. Arthur, however, was paralyzed, not by fear but by a terrible confirmation. It was Walter, his cousin, his own flesh and blood. "The witch failed!" Walter shouted, his voice already faltering from the effort. He was trembling from head to toe, as if an electric current were running through him. When the money came back, I felt it. I felt the envy returning to me, burning me from the inside. "You couldn't prosper. You were meant to go bankrupt." He tried to advance toward the stage, but Sheriff Bill, aided by 2 other strongmen, managed to grab him and drag him out of the central area. Walter continued shouting curses and confessions, mentioning the names of rituals and payments he had made in a neighboring town, far from Harmony Creek. The festival stopped. The music stopped. The celebration of Arthur Pendleton's success turned into a stage for a public confession of witchcraft and family jealousy. Arthur stepped off the stage, pushing Martha aside. He was in a trance. He didn't go after his cousin, who was being led away in handcuffs to the police car. He went to the edge of the crowd, searching for Ilara. She was still there. When Arthur's eyes met hers, she was already turning to leave. She needed nothing more. The job was done. The source of the envy had been exposed, and as she had promised, the envy fueled by Arthur's sudden success had turned against Walter himself, forcing him to break down publicly. That day, Arthur didn't go home with the trophy. He went to his office, closed the door and sat down in his chair, feeling the weight of that revelation. It wasn't just the financial loss that hurt, it was the betrayal. It was knowing that Walter's forced smile at Christmas hid a deadly poison. Martha entered, pale, and sat down on the floor beside him. "Arthur," she whispered, "what are we going to do? The whole town heard. They'll think that—" "What will they think, Martha?" Arthur interrupted, his voice hoarse. "That I'm cursed or that I'm blessed? It doesn't matter. What matters is that he did it. He tried to destroy me." He took the twisted piece of wood that Ilara had given him and held it tightly. That night, Arthur didn't sleep. He called Mr. Harrison, the lawyer, and told him the edited version of the story, that Walter, driven by envy and mental problems, had tried to sabotage the farm. He instructed Harrison to handle the legal aspects, but to be discreet. But discretion was impossible in Harmony Creek. The next day, the name Pendleton was on everyone's lips. People weren't talking about harvests or livestock. They were talking about magic, curses, and envy. Most of the farmers, simple and God-fearing people, were horrified by Walter's confession. But the biggest shock was the speed of Arthur's recovery. It was too fast, too perfect. Walter tried to curse Arthur, but Arthur used stronger magic, they whispered in the warehouses. Arthur felt he needed to understand the full extent of what Ilara had done. He needed answers that Mr. Harrison couldn't provide. He got in his pickup truck and drove back to the hills of Cold Springs. When he arrived at Ilara's cabin, the sun was low, painting the sky orange and purple. Ilara was in the garden gathering leaves. She seemed not to have moved since the last time he had seen her. I figured you'd come back, she said, without lifting her head. Arthur got out of the truck and walked over to her, feeling less like a millionaire and more like a lost boy. Ilara, what did you do? He confessed everything, in front of everyone. He said that envy was coming back to haunt him. Ilara stopped picking and wiped her hands on her linen skirt. She looked at him with those deep green eyes. I told you, Arthur, it's not enough to break the spell. You have to break the source. The spell he used was simple, but powerful, because it was linked to a real and deep feeling, his envy of you. Envy was the fuel, she explained, with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos she had caused in Harmony Creek. When I reversed the spell, I didn't just nullify its effect on his business. I caused the energy of envy he was releasing to be redirected back to him. And because you prospered so quickly, as I ensured would happen, that envy returned threefold. Arthur Pendleton's sudden success was Walter's poison. Arthur was processing the information. So, my success destroyed him. Exactly. He couldn't bear to see the living proof that his evil had failed. Envy became an internal torment, a pain so intense that he needed to purge it. The confession was the curse's last gasp. It was that or death. And the public confession was the only way to ensure the spell was completely broken, exposing his wickedness to the light of day. Arthur felt a chill. Ilara hadn't just broken the spell, she had turned her cousin's wickedness against him. And what will happen to him now? Arthur asked, feeling a pang of guilt despite everything. It was his family. The spell has been broken, Arthur. Envy will no longer consume you in that violent way. But the consequences of his envy and malice he will have to bear alone. He confessed to a crime, Arthur. He admitted to trying to destroy you, and that's not something Harmony Creek will forget. Ilara took him to the cabin and served him a strong, bitter tea. You didn't ask me how he cast the spell, Arthur. You only asked who. Arthur hesitated. He didn't want to know the gruesome details, but he knew he needed to understand in order to protect himself. How did he do that, Ilara? Where did he get that power? Ah, Arthur, power is not difficult to find when the heart is full of resentment. He sought out a charlatan who promised wealth and power at your expense. The job was simple. He used something that represented your success and buried it in the ground, intending for it to rot. He used your ambition against you. Ilara paused and looked at him seriously. He buried something you valued very much, something that symbolized your expansion. And what does Arthur Pendleton value more than anything, Arthur? The earth, he replied automatically. Not just the land, but the victory over your neighbor. He buried the spell in the piece of land you coveted most, the land you obtained through the pain of others, Arthur thought. The miller's land. The land he had bought so aggressively, forcing the old folks to leave. The land of the millers, he whispered. Ilara simply nodded. The curse was planted where his ambition hurt someone. He used the miller's resentment to strengthen his spell. That's why the spell was so powerful and so difficult to detect logically. Arthur felt a chill. He realized that the problem wasn't just Walter's envy, but the way he had built his empire. To break the spell, I had to purify that place. I had to remove what he had planted and return the energy to the earth in a positive way. That's why his success returned with such force, Arthur. It was an explosion of positive energy to neutralize the evil. He looked at the healer with admiration and terror. She wasn't a witch, but she was powerful. She had dismantled a spell and in the process exposed a familiar truth that Arthur would have preferred never to have known. Am I free now? He asked. You are free from the curse, Arthur, but you are not free from the gaze of Harmony Creek. People now know that you have enemies who use the invisible, and they know that you consulted those who work with the invisible. Your life has changed forever. Ilara advised him to keep his head held high, to focus on his work, and above all not to seek revenge against Walter. The greatest revenge had already been taken. Arthur returned home that night, a transformed man. He was still the millionaire farmer, but now he carried the burden of a public secret. Life in Harmony Creek has become tense. Walter Pendleton was taken into custody, not only for disturbing the peace, but because Sheriff Bill, a man of faith, took seriously the part of the confession about paying to have cattle killed. That was sabotage, and in agriculture, sabotage is a serious crime. The neighbors were divided. Some supported Arthur, saying he was a victim of Walter's wickedness. Others, mainly those who had sold land to Arthur under duress, looked at him with suspicion. They wondered, if Walter used magic to bring him down, what did Arthur use to get back up so quickly? Mr. Harrison, the lawyer, was in a panic. "Arthur, we need to control the narrative. The local press is calling non-stop. They want to know about the witchcraft confession. We need to say that Walter suffers from delusions, that he's ill." "No, Harrison," Arthur replied with a new and unsettling calm. "Don't lie, tell the truth. Say my cousin was jealous and tried to sabotage me. Say he's being treated. Don't mention witchcraft, but don't deny what he felt." Arthur knew that trying to hide the truth would only make the story bigger. Walter's confession was too dramatic to be forgotten. He began to re-evaluate his life and his business. Ilara's revelation about the Miller land had deeply affected him. His success didn't come solely from hard work. It came from a painful ambition, and that ambition had created the opening for Walter's magic. He started to change things. He called old Mr. Miller, who was living in a small house in town, and did something that nobody in Harmony Creek expected. He arranged a meeting with the Millers. When Arthur arrived at their house, he didn't look like the agribusiness magnate he usually was. He looked tired and humble. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," he said, taking off his hat. "I came here to apologize. I pushed too hard to buy your land. I know you loved that land." Mr. Miller, an 80-year-old man with calloused hands, simply looked at him with sad eyes. "Money can't buy history, Arthur." "I know. And what happened to me recently made me understand the price of ambition. My cousin tried to curse me, and Ilara told me that the curse was planted in that land because it was burdened with your resentment." He took a deep breath. Mrs. Miller covered her mouth with her hand. "I can't give the land back. It's now part of my farm, but I can do one thing. I will give you a share of the profits from that land each year for the rest of your lives, and I will build a memorial, a small garden on that land, in your family's name, so that your story will not be forgotten." The Miller couple were in shock. Arthur Pendleton, the agribusiness predator, was offering reparations. Arthur's act, motivated by guilt and fear of magic, began to circulate throughout Harmony Creek. People didn't know if Arthur was trying to cleanse his soul, or if he was simply trying to ensure that no further hurt would turn into a new curse. But the biggest shock, the one that truly defined Walter and Arthur's fate, came at their cousin's trial. Walter was visibly broken. He had lost the strength and hatred that had consumed him. He was pale and defeated. The judge, hearing Sheriff Bill's testimony and public confession, had to deal with the legal aspects of the sabotage, but it was impossible to ignore the context of envy and magic. Arthur was called to testify. He could have destroyed Walter, ensured he went to jail for years. But Arthur, remembering Ilara's words about revenge, did something unexpected. "Your Excellency," he said, looking at his cousin, "what Walter did was terrible. He caused me enormous losses. But he's family, and he's ill. Envy has consumed him. I don't want his revenge, I just want him to be treated." He then offered to pay for Walter's intensive treatment at an out-of-state clinic and ensure that he would not return to Harmony Creek until he was fully recovered. Arthur's decision shocked everyone. The millionaire who had previously trampled on his neighbors was now showing mercy. But Arthur's mercy came at a price. He knew that by publicly forgiving Walter, he was protecting himself from future curses. He was cleansing his karma, as Ilara had made him understand. The judge accepted the deal. Walter was admitted to the hospital, and Arthur paid the bill. Pendleton Farm returned to complete prosperity, but the mark of magic and envy never left Arthur. He became more cautious, more observant. He knew that success was a magnet for poison. And the shock to the community wasn't just Walter's confession or Arthur's miraculous recovery. The shock was the change in Arthur himself. He was still a businessman, but now he was a man who feared the unseen and who, because of that, was becoming a better, more just man. Ilara had promised that reversing the magic would shock everyone, and indeed it did, not only because of the public confession, but because of the forced transformation she imposed on Arthur Pendleton's heart. He learned that sometimes the greatest power lies not in tractors or contracts, but in the strength of a heart without resentment. But the story doesn't end there, my friends. Ilara had broken the curse, but she had tampered with forces that have consequences. Walter's health was at stake, and Arthur still had to deal with the ultimate price of having used magic to save himself. Walter's fate would still bring one last and terrible setback for Arthur. The story continues. Arthur Pendleton had won. He had broken the curse, humiliated his enemy, and as a bonus was swimming in money again. But anyone who thinks life has returned to normal in Harmony Creek is mistaken. Oh no, my friends. Magic, even when used for good or to defend against evil, leaves deep marks on the land and on people. Pendleton Ranch was thriving. The harvests were record-breaking, the cattle were healthy, and contracts were pouring onto Arthur's desk. He was richer than ever, but the price of that success was loneliness. The shock of Walter's confession had been absorbed by the community, but what remained was not admiration, but rather a mixture of fear and gossip. The people of Harmony Creek, who had always been proud of their faith and pragmatism, now had proof that unseen forces were at work right under their noses. When Arthur drove by in his new pickup truck, the neighbors waved, but the smiles were forced. They called him the Blessed Man, but whispered that he had made a pact. After all, his recovery hadn't been natural. It was as if destiny had been forcibly rewritten. Martha herself, Arthur's wife, felt the weight of this new reality. She was a churchwoman, a follower of recipes and routine. This whole story of witchcraft, envy, and healers shook her to her core. "I don't like this, Arthur," she confessed one night, while he reviewed the accounting books which now only showed positive numbers. "People look at me in the grocery store as if I were hiding a sacrificial goat in the barn. They're afraid of you." Arthur looked up, tired. "Afraid of what, Martha? Of a man who only wants to take care of his own farm?" "I'm afraid of Ilara, Arthur. Afraid of what you did to save yourself. They think you sold your soul to get that success back. And I don't know what to think. It's all happening too fast." Martha was right. The speed of prosperity was living proof of Ilara's work, and Arthur knew that, to maintain protection, he needed to follow the healer's guidance. He continued with his plan of reparation, beginning by clearing the negative energy he himself had attracted with his ambition. The agreement with the Millers was the first step. He not only secured a lifetime income for the couple, but also erected a small memorial on their former land. It wasn't ostentatious. It was a stone wall with a simple plaque that read, "Miller Family Land, 1920-2015, in memory of our roots." This gesture softened Arthur's image somewhat among the older farmers. They saw it not as charity, but as an acknowledgement that the land has a memory. But the biggest weight on Arthur's conscience was Walter. Despite showing mercy in court, Arthur couldn't ignore that he was indirectly the cause of his cousin's mental breakdown. He called the clinic where Walter was hospitalized weekly, hoping to hear that his cousin was improving. The reports, however, were discouraging. "Mr. Pendleton," said Dr. Stern, the chief psychiatrist, in one of the calls, "Walter is not responding well to treatment. He doesn't have ordinary delusions. He has a fixation. He spends the day drawing graphs and numbers, trying to calculate how you managed to recover your losses so quickly. He can't accept your prosperity." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. But is he angry? Has that hatred passed? Hate has turned into obsession. He's exhausted, Arthur. It's as if his mind is trying to digest a quantity of negative energy that it itself produced and that has come back to him. He's physically weak. He's lost a lot of weight. His blood pressure is dangerously low. It's a total collapse, Arthur, mental and physical. Ilara had said his envy will come back to him threefold. And that's exactly what was happening. The reversal of the spell was slowly killing Walter, not with a magical blow, but with the psychological torture of his own failed envy. Arthur felt guilty. He had asked for help to protect himself, but he hadn't asked to destroy his cousin. He needed more clarity. He needed to see Ilara again. One Thursday afternoon, he drove back to Cold Springs. Ilara's cabin seemed even quieter and more mysterious. He found Ilara in the garden, tending to a row of strange-looking plants. "I know why you came, Arthur," she said, without turning around. "You're worried about your cousin. You feel you've gone too far." I wanted the curse to end, Ilara. I didn't want him to go crazy. He's dying, they told me. Ilara turned around and held a dark green leaf in her hand. Arthur, you need to understand the nature of what was done. Walter tried to kill your spirit, your life, and your future. When you use darkness, you become part of it. When I reverse it, the darkness returns to its source. I didn't kill him. His envy killed him. Your success was just the mirror he couldn't bear to face. She approached, and the smell of damp earth and herbs was strong. You asked me if you would be free. Yes, you are free from the direct curse, but I told you there were consequences. And the biggest consequence is that Walter's fate is now tied to yours. His life is living proof of what happens when you try to take down Arthur Pendleton. Arthur lowered his head. He was thriving in the shadow of his cousin's suffering. Is there anything I can do for him right now? Some kind of ritual to ease this? Ilara shook her head. There's no ritual for consciousness, Arthur. His body is reacting to the despair of his mind. The only thing that would keep him alive is if he found peace. And his peace would only come if you failed, and we're not going to allow that, are we? Arthur didn't answer. He wasn't going to risk his empire again. Ilara looked at him with a warning expression. You did your part by forgiving him publicly, Arthur. You showed mercy, and that protected you from karmic repercussions. Now you need to focus on keeping your light burning. If you weaken, if you fall into fear or guilt, the breach could open again. She then revealed something to Arthur that made him freeze. Walter's spell wasn't just about your money, Arthur. It was about your descendants. He wanted the Pendleton farm to destroy you. He wanted your legacy to be barren. Arthur and Martha had no children. They had tried for years, but fertility had never come. They had accepted the situation, focusing their energy on their work. What do you mean, Ilara? Arthur asked, his heart racing. I broke that part too, Arthur. The curse wasn't just in the finances, it was in everything that represented your family's future. The cleansing I did on the Miller land cleared the path for your future. Go home, Arthur. Focus on your work, and see what life brings you now that the shadow has been removed. Arthur returned to Harmony Creek, with his head full of thoughts. Financial prosperity was real. Walter's ruin was real. And now the possibility of having an heir to the Pendleton farm hung in the air. He could barely talk to Martha about it. It was too sensitive a subject, a dream they had buried long ago. But a month after her last conversation with Ilara, Martha began to feel strange. It wasn't illness. It was a different kind of tiredness, a sensitivity she hadn't felt in years. She took the test, and it came back positive. Martha was pregnant. The news shook Arthur more than Walter's confession. It was the final, irrefutable proof of Ilara's intervention. It was life returning, the fullness of success that Walter's magic had tried to prevent. When Arthur told Mr. Harrison, the lawyer, the news, the man nearly fell out of his chair. Arthur, this is wonderful, but after all these years, what a miracle. Arthur knew it wasn't a miracle. It was the result of a broken spell. News of Martha's pregnancy spread through the city like wildfire. People were already shocked by Walter's confession and sudden fortune. Now, Martha's late pregnancy was the icing on the cake of Arthur's magic. He broke the spell and gained an heir, they whispered. That man has the devil in him, or Ilara is his patron saint. Arthur, however, was at peace with his secret. He had made peace with the Millers, he had forgiven Walter, and he was about to become a father. He felt he had paid the price for his ambition. But fate, my friends, is a relentless storyteller, and the plot of Envy and Magic still had one last, painful chapter in store. Arthur was focused on his new life, preparing a nursery in the enormous farmhouse. He was happy for the first time in a long time. That's when the phone rang. It was Dr. Stern from the clinic. The doctor's voice was deep, lacking the formality of before. Arthur, I'm sorry to inform you, but Walter didn't make it. He passed away this morning. Arthur felt his body go cold. He knew this was going to happen, but the news still hit him like a lightning bolt. What happened, doctor? Was it your heart? Not directly, Arthur. It was exhaustion. His body simply gave out. But there's something else you need to know, Arthur. Something he did shortly before he died. Something that shocked him and that may have had something to do with his death. Dr. Stern continued hesitantly. Walter spent his last few days very lucid, but extremely agitated. He kept saying he needed to get rid of something. He started shouting about the last piece of Arthur. He insisted we had to find it. And we did. Arthur was gripping the phone so tightly that his knuckles were white. What did you find, Dr. Stern? It was an object, Arthur, hidden in his mattress. A small leather object that he seemed to have kept for years. And he made a note, a final confession which we found beside it. Dr. Stern paused dramatically. He confessed that this object was the final part of the curse. He said that Ilara's spell had reversed the magic, but that he had kept this anchor to ensure that if he fell, you would fall with him. He boasted that if he died, the final spell would be activated to take something very precious from you. Arthur felt panic rise in his throat. The anchor. Ilara had broken the spell planted in the earth, but Walter had kept a part of it. What is the object, Doctor? Arthur asked, almost pleading. It's a wallet, Arthur, an old worn leather wallet, and inside it there was only a photograph, an old family photo from when you were children. Arthur tried to remember. A family photo. And his final confession, Arthur, Dr. Stern continued, his voice low, was this. I cannot have peace as long as Arthur has an heir. If I die, the last spell will take his future to the grave with me. The child will never be born. The news of Walter's death, combined with the final confession and the threat of a posthumous spell against the baby, shattered Arthur's newfound peace. He hung up the phone and ran to the room where Martha was, beaming, sewing baby clothes. He didn't tell her about Walter's death immediately. He needed Ilara. He needed to know if the death of his cousin, the source of his envy, had triggered a final trap. He immediately called Ilara, who answered on the third try. Hey Lara, Walter died, and he left an anchor, a final spell against the child. He said that if he died, the baby would die with him. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. I knew he would try something like this, Ilara replied, her voice more tense than Arthur had ever heard it. Envy is like a parasite, Arthur. It fights until its last breath. I broke what was on the ground, but I couldn't touch what was kept with him, because it was his life. Now that he's dead, the power has been unleashed. What do I do? What is this wallet? He said it's a picture of us when we were kids. The photo is the link, Arthur. It's a representation of your past and your future. You need to bring me that object, and you need to be quick. The spell is active. Walter's envy will try to take the most precious life you have now, your heir. Ilara gave clear and urgent instructions. Arthur had to call Dr. Stern, asked him to send the wallet immediately by express mail without anyone touching it, and that he not reveal its contents to Martha. That day, Arthur reverted to being the ruthless businessman he once was, but now he was racing against time and against a force he couldn't see. Money couldn't buy his son's safety. He called Dr. Stern. Within a few hours, the package containing Walter's wallet was on its way to Harmony Creek. Arthur waited on the balcony all night, gazing at the dark sky. He knew Walter's death wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the final battle. He had to protect Martha and the baby. And what Arthur did with the wallet and what Ilara demanded of him to break that last terrible curse was something as drastic and as public as Walter's confession. It was the only way to prove to magic that the life of Arthur Pendleton's heir was more important than any wealth or pride. The story continues. Arthur Pendleton was living through the hell of uncertainty. He was a man accustomed to controlling time, to dictating the rhythm of the harvest and the market. Now, he was a hostage to an express mail package, slowly traveling along interstate highways, carrying his son's life. Poor Martha was oblivious to it all. She spent her mornings on the porch under the gentle Oklahoma sun, knitting a small blue blanket. Arthur watched her, and the sight of that naive happiness built on a foundation of shattered magic terrified him. He couldn't tell her about Walter's final threat. It would have been enough for her to lose the baby from the shock. He spent the entire night in the office on call with the phone in his hand. He had instructed Mr. Harrison, the lawyer, to handle the arrangements for Walter's body, maintaining the official story of mental and physical collapse. Arthur was paying for everything, ensuring the funeral was discreet but dignified. It was the last blood debt he owed his cousin. In the early afternoon, the moving truck finally stopped in front of the farmhouse. Arthur ran to the door before the driver could honk. The package was small, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with tape. It was a mundane object, but it carried the weight of a death curse. Arthur signed the receipt with a trembling hand and took the package to his office, locking the door behind him. He tore open the paper and pulled out the wallet. It was worn, dark leather, its edges folded from decades of use. It was the wallet Walter had used since adolescence. Arthur vaguely remembered seeing it. It was an object of intimacy, a piece of Walter's life. With hesitant fingers, Arthur opened his wallet. Inside there were some crumpled dollars, old receipts, and in the clear plastic compartment a photograph. He pulled out the photograph. It was yellowed and faded. It showed two boys, perhaps 8 and 10 years old, smiling broadly, shoulder to shoulder, in front of an old barn. Arthur recognized the barn from his father's farm, and he recognized the boys, himself and Walter. They were happy, close, before ambition and envy separated them. Walter's spell was cruelly personal. He didn't use hatred, but rather the memory of something good that had been lost, anchoring the curse to the broken blood tie. Arthur picked up the phone and called Ilara. "It's here," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's a wallet, with a picture of us as children." "The object of the memory," Ilara confirmed, her voice calm but with an underlying urgency. "He guarded the lost innocence of both of you, Arthur, and he used his death to transform that memory into poison. The spell is simple, life for life. If he can't have a future, neither will you." "What do I do? Do I burn it? Do I bury it?" Arthur was desperate. "No. If you destroy the object now, the spell will manifest immediately in Martha. The energy needs to be diverted. It needs to be replaced by a greater force." Ilara took a deep breath. Arthur could hear the rustling of grass leaves in the background. "You need to come now, Arthur, and bring your wallet. But you need to be ready for what I'm going to ask. It's not money, it's not a lucky charm, it's something that will hurt more than the loss of your entire harvest." Arthur didn't hesitate. He put his wallet in his inside coat pocket, gave Martha a flimsy excuse about an urgent problem with a supplier, and drove off into the Cold Springs Hills as if he were fleeing from the devil himself. When he arrived, the sun was setting. Ilara was waiting for him inside the hut, in front of the same clay bowl, which was now filled with a thick, fragrant smoke. "Sit down, Arthur, and give me your wallet." Arthur handed over the object. Ilara placed it on the table without touching it with her bare hands. She picked up a pair of metal tweezers and turned it over. "Walter's envy was the fuel, but the engine of this final spell is your pride, Arthur, your ambition. He knew that what you value most of all is expansion and power over the land. To break that anchor, you need to prove that your son's life is worth more than your empire. I'll give you whatever you want. I'll give you half the farm, Ilara. I'll give you all my profits. I'll give you whatever it takes," Arthur pleaded. Ilara shook her head, her green eyes fixed on the wallet. "Money has no value to magic, Arthur. The sacrifice has to be felt, it has to be public, and it has to be irreversible. It has to be something you would never do in your right mind, something that goes against everything Arthur Pendleton stands for." She grabbed a handful of coarse salt and threw it into the smoke. The scent of sage intensified. "You need to let go of your core ambition, Arthur. You need to break the cycle of more that has generated all this envy." "What is this, Ilara? Be clear." "Your expansion, Arthur, has been aggressive. You've bought land from the Millers, the Johnsons, and so many others, always pushing the boundaries. You need to take a piece of the heart of Pendleton Farm and return it to the community in a way that ensures it will never again be used for profit." Arthur frowned. "Give it back? How?" "It's not about selling, it's about dedication. You need to choose the most valuable piece of land, the most productive one, or the one that symbolizes your most ambitious victory, and transform it into something sacred, something that cannot be touched by greed." Ilara leaned forward. "I need you to take 500 acres of prime land, the best you have, and publicly declare it a community sanctuary. Nothing can be planted for sale. Nothing can be built, except perhaps a small park. It must be a permanent, legally registered dedication, a black hole in your profit map, a sacrifice that shows your heir is worth more than 500 acres of liquid gold." Arthur remained silent, processing the demand. 500 acres. Prime land, in the middle of his colossal farm. This wasn't just a loss, it was a testament to madness for any farmer. It was a blow to his ego, to his power. "I can't do that, Ilara. It'll potentially cost millions. It'll send the wrong message. They'll think I'm broke, or worse, that I'm trying to buy the city's forgiveness." "And what's worse, Arthur? The town gossip or the death of your son?" Ilara challenged him, her voice emotionless. "Walter used your ambition against you. You have to use selflessness to break the spell. The universe needs to see that you're willing to pay the price of your success to save this innocent life." Arthur looked at his wallet. He thought of Martha's radiant face. He had no choice. He had built his empire on the sacrifices of others. Now he would have to build his own. "I do," he said, his voice low. "Which land?" Ilara closed her eyes for a moment. "The land needs to be the one you covet most, the one you're most proud of." "I see." "Yes. The central cornfield, Arthur. The piece that connects the old north sector to the south sector. The one you drained, and that is the most fertile." Arthur swallowed hard. That piece was the crown jewel of Pendleton Farm. "You have 48 hours, Arthur. You need to register the dedication and make the public announcement before the power of Walter's death is fully consolidated. When the spell is broken, the wallet will unravel, and only then will Martha and the child be safe." Arthur left Ilara's cabin in the middle of the night, feeling empty. He held his son's life in his hands, and the price was the destruction of his own empire. He drove back to Harmony Creek and, at dawn, called Mr. Harrison. "Harrison, I need you at the farm in 1 hour. Bring the property documents and a notary. It's urgent and confidential." Harrison arrived nervous and confused. He saw Arthur, who was pale and sleepless, with Walter's leather wallet on the table. "Arthur, what's going on? Walter died, the funeral is being arranged, and now you want a notary? We need to focus on the narrative that Walter was ill." "Shut up, Harrison, and listen to me. I need you to prepare an irrevocable deed of dedication for 500 acres of the center field. It's the most productive piece, the one that connects the two main fields." Harrison looked at Arthur as if he had gone mad. 500 acres? Arthur, that's worth a fortune. Are you serious? Why would you do that? "I will dedicate this land to the community, Harrison. It will be a Pendleton family sanctuary, forbidden for any agricultural or commercial use forever. It will be managed by a community council that I will fund. I want it to be a park, a place of peace, a memorial to all the farmers who lost their land to ambition." Harrison rubbed his forehead. "Arthur, this is insane. You just recovered from catastrophic losses. The bank is going to freak out. Your partners are going to think you're mentally ill, just like your cousin. I don't care what they think, Harrison. I care about my future. Get the paperwork done. And I want a public announcement tomorrow morning. Gather the local press, the cooperative leaders, the sheriff, whoever you can." Harrison, the lawyer who had spent 20 years helping Arthur acquire land, was now forced to help him part with his most prized possession. He knew Arthur was acting under pressure that went beyond the financial, but he was paid to obey. The document was drafted hastily. The notary, a chubby, sweaty man, could hardly believe what he was authenticating. He read and reread the irreversibility clauses. Arthur Pendleton was, in fact, handing over the heart of his empire. The following morning, the sun had barely risen when the news spread through Harmony Creek. Arthur Pendleton was to make an urgent announcement about the future of the Pendleton farm. The community, still reeling from Walter's confession and Martha's miraculous pregnancy, turned out in droves. They gathered at the community center, expecting some kind of merger announcement or a massive new acquisition. Arthur went up on stage. He was dressed in his best suit, but he looked thinner and more serious than ever. Martha sat in the front row, smiling, unaware of the reason for the meeting. Arthur took a deep breath. He looked at Sheriff Bill, the cooperative leaders, and the neighbors, many of whom were eyeing him suspiciously. He felt the weight of Walter's wallet in his pocket. "My friends," he began, his voice firm, "I've called you here today to talk about the future of Pendleton Farm, the future of Harmony Creek, and the future of my family." He spoke briefly about Walter's death, offering a polished version of the story, mentioning his cousin's struggle with mental illness and envy. What happened to Walter made me reflect deeply on what is important. I built this farm with ambition, and that ambition sometimes blinded me to the human cost of success. I caused hurt, and that hurt attracted darkness into my life. The crowd was in absolute silence. I don't want my son to inherit a farm built on greed. I want him to inherit a farm built on respect for the land and the community. Arthur gestured to Harrison, who was standing beside him, pale. Therefore today I, Arthur Pendleton, have signed and registered a document of irrevocable dedication. I am taking 500 acres from the heart of the Pendleton farm, our most fertile land, and dedicating it to the community of Harmony Creek. The reaction was immediate. A loud murmur swept through the room. Farmers rose from their chairs, incredulous. This land, Arthur continued, raising his voice, will be known as the Pendleton Family Sanctuary. It will be a park, a place of rest, a space where nature can flourish without the pressure of the harvest. It is a gift and a promise that the ambition of the Pendleton farm will never again be excessive. The shock was overwhelming. It wasn't just the value of the land, it was the breaking of a fundamental principle. Arthur Pendleton, the man who swallowed up farms, was giving back his best land. Tears welled up in Martha's eyes. She didn't understand the motivation, but she sensed the sincerity of the gesture. She thought he was doing it because of the pregnancy, a promise to be a better father. As Arthur spoke about the details of founding the sanctuary, he felt a tingling in his pocket. He discreetly put his hand inside and felt Walter's wallet. The leather, which had once been firm, was now strangely malleable. When he squeezed it, the wallet crumbled in his hands, turning to dry dust and fine sand. The photo, the link to the curse, evaporated like smoke. The anchor had been broken. The sacrifice had been accepted. Arthur felt an overwhelming relief, so strong it almost made him stagger. He knew that at that moment the baby was safe. The shock in the Harmony Creek community was complete. Arthur Pendleton had transformed before their very eyes. The man they feared for his greed was now the man who had sacrificed millions in land. But the story of the shock didn't end with the donation. What happened next, involving Walter's body, gave Ilara and Arthur the final proof that the magic had been completely undone. Walter Pendleton's body was being prepared for burial, which would be discreet, in a small neighboring town, far from the prying eyes of Harmony Creek. Arthur had insisted on a closed casket, citing his cousin's frail condition. The day after the sanctuary announcement, Dr. Stern called Arthur. "Arthur, I have something very strange to tell you. Something that happened to Walter after his death." Arthur sat down, his heart racing. "What's wrong, doctor? Is he all right?" "It's not about his peace, Arthur. It's about the body. The funeral home called today. They said Walter's body is in strange condition. It's not normal decomposition. It's like he's drying out, mummifying at an alarming rate. And the most bizarre thing, they found something in his chest." Dr. Stern hesitated. "They found an object, attached to the clothing over the heart. It appeared to have been placed there while the patient was alive. It's a small piece of twisted wood, Arthur. It looks like a root." Arthur's eyes widened. He immediately thought of the object Ilara had given him for protection, the one he still kept at home. "The description reminds me of an amulet, doctor. He must have been wearing it for protection." "No, Arthur. The team said the root was hot, even though it had been dead for 2 days. And what happened when they removed it? Now that's the shock. What happened? When they removed the piece of wood, the root disintegrated into dust, as if it had been rotten for centuries, and at the same instant, Walter's body, it began to decompose rapidly, horribly. They said it was as if the force that kept him dry had been removed. They are having trouble preparing him for the funeral." Arthur hung up the phone, feeling dizzy. He ran to the bedroom and grabbed the wooden object Ilara had given him. It was cold and solid in his hand. He realized the truth. Ilara hadn't just given him an amulet. She had traded his protection for Walter's, ensuring that Walter's spell was the only thing keeping him alive or dry in his final days. When the final anchor was broken with the sacrifice of the earth, Walter's protection was removed and he could finally rest or rot. Arthur sensed the cruelty and perfection of Ilara's magic. She not only saved him, she used Walter's life and death as part of the protection ritual. He returned to Ilara one last time. He needed nothing more, just confirmation. "Ilara, you gave me your protection, but you traded it for his, didn't you? The piece of wood I kept was mine, and what he had was what kept him alive, burning away his envy." Ilara stood in front of the cabin, in the sunlight. She smiled slightly. "Magic needs balance, Arthur. Your envy needed somewhere to go. My protection kept you alive long enough for you to make your public confession, securing your legal release. And my amulet, which you kept, Arthur, is now your true protection. You saved yourself with the sacrifice of the land. You proved that your future is worth more than your past of greed. Now, there are no more loopholes for darkness." Arthur looked at the vast farm he had left behind. He had lost 500 acres, his cousin was dead, and the community was in turmoil. But Martha was healthy, and the child was safe. He realized that the final shock wasn't Walter's death, nor the confession, nor the land donation. The final shock was the proof that magic was real, relentless, and that he, Arthur Pendleton, the wealthiest and most pragmatic farmer in Oklahoma, was now a man marked by the intervention of the unseen. He thanked Ilara, and she simply nodded. "Go home, Arthur, and live your new life. And remember, the earth has a memory. Take good care of it." Arthur returned to Pendleton Farm. He was the same man, but the world saw him differently. He was the millionaire who had made a pact, the farmer who had sacrificed the land to save his son from a family curse. Pendleton Farm continued to prosper, but Arthur was never the same again. He was a more generous, more cautious man. He never again tried to buy land from struggling neighbors. He had learned that the price of ambition, when unchecked, can be paid with the soul. And the story of Arthur Pendleton and Walter, the envious cousin, became the most told legend in Harmony Creek, a legend that taught that in farming and in life, one must fear what one cannot see, and that the greatest wealth is that which envy cannot touch. The story continues. Ah, my friends, Arthur Pendleton had won. But make no mistake, victory did not bring him back the naive peace he had before it all began. The Pendleton farm prospered, yes, but Arthur carried the weight of knowing that his success was the tombstone of his cousin, Walter. Walter's funeral was discreet, just as Arthur had orchestrated. The family attended, tense, unsure what to make of the public confession of witchcraft. Sheriff Bill and Dr. Stern kept quiet about the disintegrated wallet and the body that dried up and rotted in days. But the truth, like incense smoke, hung over Harmony Creek. Arthur Pendleton had saved himself by means that defied logic and faith. Arthur's life became a waiting game, a tense wait for the arrival of his son, the final proof that Walter's curse had failed in its cruelest attempt. While Martha enjoyed a peaceful and happy pregnancy, Arthur dedicated himself to making his sacrifice a reality. The Pendleton family shrine was not just a signed piece of paper. Arthur invested a fortune to transform it into a park that the community could use. He planted native trees, built wooden benches, and installed a small walking trail. The act shocked the older farmers. Seeing those 500 acres, the crown jewel of Arthur's productivity, untouched by the harvest, was like watching a millionaire burning money in a public square. But over time, the community began to use the place. Families had picnics. Children played where there had once only been corn. The sanctuary became a meeting point, a place of peace amidst the ambition of agribusiness. And that was the point. Arthur, without knowing it, was planting a new kind of seed: gratitude. The sanctuary was physical proof that he had changed, or at least had been forced to change by the fear of the unseen. His relationship with Ilara, the healer, also changed. Arthur never again sought her help with financial or business problems. He visited her one last time, shortly before the child's birth, bringing a simple gift, seeds of rare flowers that he had imported. Ilara accepted the gift with a smile. "You don't need me anymore, Arthur," she said, fiddling with the seeds. "You've learned your lesson. Your success is now rooted in your justice, not just your greed. The best protection against envy is a pure heart." She warned him about the only thing that remained: Your son will be born free from the curse, but he will bear the name Pendleton, and that, in itself, is a burden. Teach him to respect the land and not to use his power to crush others. Your sacrifice with the sanctuary is his shield. Protect it." Arthur returned home, finally feeling at peace. Months passed, and summer gave way to autumn. The day of the birth arrived, and it was a difficult but safe delivery. Arthur and Martha welcomed a big, healthy baby boy. When Arthur held his son in his arms, he knew that Walter's curse was, in fact, completely broken. Life had triumphed over envy. They named the boy David. David Pendleton. A simple, strong name that didn't carry the weight of the ambition of the Arthurs of the past. David's birth sealed Arthur's fate. He was the man who had lost everything, consulted a healer, witnessed his cousin's magical ruin, and, through an act of public sacrifice, had recovered not only his fortune, but more importantly, the future of his lineage. Pendleton Farm continued to grow, but in a different way. Arthur invested in sustainability, in fair partnerships with neighbors, and in technology that did not harm the environment. He became a leader, but a leader who reminded everyone that success should be shared. He never spoke publicly about Elara or magic again. To the world, he was Arthur Pendleton, who, after an inexplicable streak of bad luck and his cousin's mental illness, had an epiphany and became a philanthropist. But on quiet nights, gazing at the vast cornfield stretching to the horizon, Arthur still felt the shiver. He knew that logic and accounting didn't explain everything. He knew that money couldn't buy peace, but sacrifice could buy protection. And the story of the millionaire farmer, who was forced to sacrifice his ambition to save his heir, and whose cousin died of magical envy, remained forever in the memory of Harmony Creek. It was whispered on winter nights, a legend that served as a warning to all ambitious farmers. Be careful who you step on in the path of your harvest, because the earth remembers, and envy, my friend, is a spell that always returns to the one who casts it. And Arthur Pendleton, the wealthiest rancher in Oklahoma, lived the rest of his life under the shadow of this truth, a man blessed and permanently shaken by the forces he had dared to invoke. And so, he ensured that his son, David, grew up in a land where money, for the first time, was not the only measure of value.